was so big. You undoubtedly had part of my confusion. Earlier today, I was talking to Tom Lutz about Los Angeles, LA literature, Los Angeles. Tom is running the LA Book Review, LA Review of Books, so you want to talk about that stuff. And so, actually, I want to just rehash some of that, if I can remember his questions. So Tom, one of Tom's questions was if he was videotaping it, so he said, if this was all anybody saw about LA, who would you want them to know about? Well, I said, when I think of LA, when I think of literature in general, I think of small presses, because that's, for me, where literature comes from. Corporate presses out of New York City only pick up on literature 20, 30 years later. If there's a, if there's a print run that they can recognize. When I grew up in East LA, there was no prospect, there was no expectation that Chicano literature would ever be published. And it wasn't until the 70s when Sandra Cisneros sold about 500,000 copies of House on Mango Street with Arte Publico Press out of Texas, that New York got interested. And saw that there was a readership. Pretty much until then, those of us who grew up on the East Side and are from the East Side, pretty much expected to be excluded and marginalized, just as Sandra herself was excluded and marginalized until you sell 500,000 books. Okay, but it showed that there was a market there, and obviously then they went after that market and started fielding other authors, her peers, and making that some representation in there. But before that happened, Tom asked me who did I think of when I thought of LA? Obviously, there was Charles Bukowski. John Martin formed Black Sparrow Press. I forget if John Martin was living in Santa Barbara or not, but he formed Black Sparrow Press specifically to publish Bukowski. Charles Bukowski told him that he quit his job at the post office and that he would give him a monthly sum to write, and then the success of Bukowski's books, which actually sold millions more in Europe than they did in the United States, funded all the other writers that Black Sparrow was able to publish, including Wanda Coleman, who's kind of the natural, most prominent poet of Los Angeles, for the last 20 or 30 years. And so I thought about Wanda, thought about Charles Bukowski. Bukowski got Black Sparrow to publish John Fante. According to Bukowski, he came to writing in the basement of the downtown LA Public Library by reading John Fante. And Fante himself had gone into the movie writing business, and his books were out of print. So Black Sparrow Press brought them into print after a number of decades. And so, yeah, that kind of recuperation and small press representation, that represents, LA literature for me. then, of course, later on, all of these books get picked up and republished by New York. But, 20 or 30 years later. I see so Tom is making this video or movie about LA literature, and I told him there's literary activity going on all the time that never makes it into print. And I mentioned to him that Terry Wolverton wrote a book about the LA Women's Building. And that was the first place that I met Wanda Coleman, like around 1985. And the Women's Building was on the east side of Chinatown, right at the edge of the river, across the river from Lincoln Heights. And the Women's Building, obviously, was a product of the women's movement and hosted writing workshops for women. It had a gallery space about this big in the front, and it had printing presses in the back where women, but everybody in the community really could take classes in printing and print broadsides or chapbooks or the products of their writing from those workshops, and those were ongoing. Gloria Alvarez was a young single mom at about that time, and she told me about looking for writing workshops to try and become a poet, and not finding any that were fluent in both English and Spanish at the same time. That there was no mix. That you were either in a Spanish workshop or in an English workshop, and so she started, from what I can tell, the first bilingual Chicano writing workshop at the Women's Building in those years, in the early '80s, and that building also was where I first came across the poems of Marisol del Norte, published in little chapbook that came out of a women's circle writing workshop there in the Women's Building, and I used to go to these meetings upstairs, these political meetings upstairs. I didn't go to the writing workshops. Anyway, and then I wanted to mention Marisol del Norte because she was part of this. This group called Osco, which was a performance, like a avant-garde performance artists group that did street theater and performance art and tagging LACMA because they didn't have any Chicano art in there. And so they're kind of legendary, but Marisol and pretty much Harry Gamboa too, who were among the founders of it, got tagged as performance artists and not poets. And so for decades they didn't end up having any books put out, although they had their performances on video and vinyl, actually, in the days of vinyl, from Freeway Records. And so there was that level of activity among women's circles at the Women's Building and other places beyond Baroque, where Michelle Clinton and Aquila Oliver, they ran weekly writing workshops also, and a lot of people went through those workshops, and so that kind of activity has always been going on. It still continues to go on. even though the women's building is no longer there, and other people are running Beyond Baroque now, and yeah, I think that that there's this kind of underground, underground activity, underground life. That there's always this this life of poetry that is not necessarily expressed in terms of critical reception in the amputated Los Angeles Times or elsewhere, but but it's important. It's an expression, a manifestation of those communities where those people come out of, and they're not to be denied. So, looking west from the east side, that's kind of what I saw when I was growing up, that there was this continuous level of activity, and these people were always writing, reading, speaking, and so they may not necessarily publish books, but they're always there. I think sort of related to that, I'm going to read a little note that I wrote for a online magazine, and they asked me about my last book. My last book was called World Ball Notebook, and it was a kind of compendium of pieces, segments that were indexed to soccer as a motif, as a figure, and so these notes talk about that. So the soccer motif indexes the decade that I documented in the book. It's a thread that runs through that period when I was teaching full-time at Hollenbeck Junior High, and I was English department chair. I was union representative. I was writing several books. I was raising 3 kids. I was doing karate 15 to 20 hours a week. I was engaged in community activism. I was doing anti-war work and organizing cultural events, including a community center called Café Cultural on First Street, pretty much right down the block from where Casa 0101 and Eastside Love and a number of other cultural centers now operate. I'm happy to see. It was a crazy period of very little sleep. My kids wanted to participate in soccer, so of course I thought, oh no, not another thing to take care of. 3 evenings per week hanging out at the park at soccer practice, and all day Saturday or Sunday attending soccer games. And I worked out that with my wife that I would have 1 weekend day per week for writing. But of course, some of these demands and duties sometimes turn out to be the best things ever. I'm no soccer fanatic, but they didn't have youth soccer when I was a kid, so I never played, but soccer turned out to be terrific. At the same time, Ruben Martinez asked me to co-sponsor a poetry writing workshop for teenagers at Hollenbeck Junior High, and that was another activity that I felt like I didn't need. But after 7 years mentoring teen writers and watching them go from 13 to 20, some of them, workshopping their writing, including Carla Diaz, who's married to the artist Mario Ibarra, workshopping their writing, taking them to perform at public readings and street fairs, radio stations, and literary venues around the city. I watched them use poetry to change their lives, and that's something that writers they talk about, you may have only heard about. These kids focus on the essentially useful aspect of poetry to express what's most important in their lives. And they used writing as a ticket out of their own neighborhood on the east side, which otherwise many of them never left, out of their limited opportunities, and use it to meet people across the city, to apply for performing arts summer school programs at colleges and summer jobs. One student wrote an essay that got her a free trip to Spain from the Spanish consulate and went on to get an MFA in creative writing from CalArts. Years later, in 2007, as I was returning from the Mexico City book fair, trying to get through the Mexico City airport with a broken ankle, carrying my bag badly on crutches, I bumped into one of those teen poets, now grown up, by chance, also passing through the airport, who carried my bag. She hesitated to admit she didn't write poetry anymore. She used her writing skills instead to get a broadcast journalism degree from CSUN and is now a Univision TV news producer. It turned out those demands and duties that were always continually being asked of me above my paid jobs were the most rewarding. So that's kind of my, that's kind of, for me, that's a statement of poetics. How many more minutes?
Gee, I haven't been 3:43. I'd say you probably should wrap it up. But soon.
Wrap it up?
I'm not saying now.
Okay. Well, maybe a couple. What, 10? Okay. I feel, you know, like standing up here, I feel like these it's thanks to Brian again for undertaking this thing. Yeah, for me, one thing I didn't tell Tom Lutz when he had lights in my face was that, you know, I never expected to write anything. I didn't expect to grow up, really. I grew up during the Vietnam War, and and there were people sort of being killed left and right, and I didn't expect to necessarily survive those days, those events. But when I did, it was very exciting because you get to live. And you get to sort of work over your bad attitude. You had a bad attitude before, but you get to work with it. You get to try to be better than you used to be. What else? You get to try and avoid all the shit that they're doing now. You know, I felt like, you know, all the stuff that we were organizing for, fighting for, demonstrating against, it's all happening. So in a way, I often walk around feeling like total failure. Because like this was what we were supposed to be avoiding. Endless war, in public institutions that serve private profit, etc. You know, like we have been organizing against that stuff forever. So, all right. So I should read a poem about it. All right. This is game 114. That one of those poems that I probably wrote while I was washing dishes. Marx failed. The big deal fell through. My sense of humor failed. No one there to laugh. Suicide failed. That fad didn't catch on. Simplicity failed. Dang. Peace failed. Looked just like war. The war to end all wars failed. 1918. The Mayans failed. Civilization collapsed. Dinosaurs failed, became birds. The sun went down, came up on a foggy day. The moon failed, so shut up. Dirt failed, came out in the wash. Your mom failed. Look at you, kid. Courage failed because of stupidity. The president failed. I piss in his mother's milk. Capitalism failed. 100 million Africans died. Piss and vinegar failed. That salad's untouched. Success failed. The pop singer sang. The very notion of failure failed into the day. Violet failed, blushed purple. The moment failed, never ended. The stars failed. Shh. One more, a short one, because I'm wrapping it up. I wanted to read about we'll see. It's a Brooklyn poem because I was talking about LA. It's like an ode to Brooklyn. I know exactly where it is. Oh, here it is. Okay. All right. I awoke in a white room, unfurnished, but rugs and scattered clothing on the floor. Lisa said you could stay here. Semi-disoriented as usual, I go check things out. The next room is dim and green, like entering a forest, like a rainforest of southeast Alaska, but that was last week. This is like an art installation. This room is simulacrum or parody of a dim green forest. Everything's soft. I'm trying to make it out. Against the far wall, items in rows on shelves. What are they? I can't tell. Personal items, repurposed or repainted. What do they represent? It's some kind of art thing, art idea. I can't tell what the items are. Against the mossy background, plush, artificial moss, or is it real? It's like Mike Kelly junk. What does it mean? A woman, a white woman, brunette, curly hair, a resident, I assume, goes by in a periphery like Emily Barton. She has a sour bird-faced expression like she needs her morning coffee. So there's other people in the apartment. She goes into the kitchen. Maybe I should put my clothes on. My clothes are probably in the pile in that first bedroom. I ambulate past a cavernous dark room, probably the dining and living room area, with a fireplace at one end. But I keep going, where the hell are my pants? Enter another bedroom. It's not the first room I woke in, it's another bedroom. A guy, a younger white guy, like the woman with close cropped hair, goes by, shuts the door behind himself, looking like Joe Mosconi. He pays little or no attention to me, sour expression. Meanwhile, I'm poking about the piles of abandoned clothes in the corners. I've woken in gentrified white hipster America and I can't find my pants.